Hey, what's going on, guys? In this series, we're going to be building an application using Node.js, Express, and Sequelize, which is an ORM that works with any relational database such as MySQL, Postgres. Well, I shouldn't say any. It works with MySQL, Postgres, SQLite, and Microsoft SQL. All right, so we're going to be using Postgres, but you can just as well use any of the others. I actually created this application on a Windows machine using MySQL with XAMPP. But in this video, I'm on my Mac, and I always have problems with XAMPP on a Mac, so I'm going to be using Postgres. All right, so either one is fine. If you want to do exactly what I did, you just want to go to postgresql.org, go to download, and I'm on a Mac, so I'm going to click that, and I want to click on the download installer, and I just grabbed the version 11.1 installer. Okay, you can also download it for Windows if you want. And this should come with pgadmin, which is an admin tool similar to how phpMyAdmin works with MySQL. So again, either, if you want to use either, that's fine. And I just want to show you, I don't have the full application built on this machine, but I do have the HTML template. So I want it to look decent. So I'm including this CodeGig HTML folder as a download in the description for you guys if you're going to follow along, because you're going to need the interface. So if I open up the index.html file, you'll see the home page, which is just a search box where we can find a coding gig or a coding job by keyword, so JavaScript, PHP, Rails, whatever it may be. We also have the all gigs page where it lists all the gigs with the title, description, budget. The apply now is just a mail to link to the contact email. And then to add a gig, we have this link here that has a form to add all the information. Okay, now we're not going to do authentication just yet. I may add it if this series does well and you guys like it. I might add authentication with Passport, but I do have other videos that use authentication in Node.js, including my Node.js course. So if you guys already know how to do that, then you may want to implement that yourselves, but I may do it later on. But for now, we're going to just kind of get this functionality going. So first thing I want to do is create our database and our one table. We're just going to have a gigs table, and you can do that however you want. If you're using MySQL, you might want to use phpMyAdmin, or you can use the terminal or some other program. I'm using pgadmin, so I'm just going to go over to databases here and say create database, and I'm going to call this CodeGig. I'll use the Postgres user. All right, so let's now go to our CodeGig database. We want to go to schemas, and let's go to tables and create table. Okay, so we'll call this gigs, and I'm going to use Postgres as the owner. This should all be fine. Let's go to columns, and let's click the little plus sign here and add a column. So this is going to be ID, and the type is actually going to be serial, which is basically an auto increment integer, and we want this to be our primary key, so you want to click this right here. All right, and if you're using MySQL, just create an int and give it auto increment and primary key. Next one is going to be the title, and we're going to use a varying character, or character varying. And for title, for length, let's do 200. Okay, we also want technologies. Okay, technologies, same thing. We're going to do character varying. And as far as length, let's do 100. No, we'll do 200. Okay, we also want a budget. Do character varying, and let's see, we'll do 20 for the length. And next one is going to be description. For description, let's do text. Okay, we also want a contact email. And for that, we'll do varying character. And we also want two fields that Sequelize is going to look for, that's created at and updated at. So we want created at, spelled just like that, camel case, and this is going to be a date field, and then we also want an updated at, so let's create that, updated at, and that will be date as well, and that should do it. Let's go ahead, actually let me just check. Yeah, I think that should do it. Let's click save. And now we have our database, we have our gigs table with all of our columns. Okay. All right, so now we can actually start to create our application. So let's jump into VS Code, and I just have an empty folder called CodeGig, and first thing we want to do is in our terminal, I'm using my integrated VS Code terminal, I'm going to do npm init so that we can create a package.json file. So we're going to enter through this. For a description, we'll just say simple job find app for coders. And the entry point is going to be app.js, and for author, you guys can put your own name if you want, and I'm going to do an MIT license. Alright, so that's our package.json. Now we need to install our dependencies. So let's do npm install. We need Express, which is our web framework. Body parser, because we have a form that we need to get data from. Sequelize, of course. And if we look at the docs for Sequelize, or the getting started page right here, oh, this isn't it. We want to go to get started. We need to install Sequelize, which I just added, but we also need to add the database driver. If you're using MySQL, you want to install MySQL 2, like that. We're using Postgres, so we actually need to install PG and PG-H store. We need both of those things. So let's add PG and PG-H store. And then the last thing I want is the Express-handlebars template engine, because we need a way to display our HTML and also include dynamic content. We need to be able to loop through the gigs and output them and stuff like that. And handlebars is my favorite template engine for Express or for Node. So I think that's it. Let's go ahead and run that, and we'll install those dependencies. And those will get added to our package.json. Next thing I want to do is just add a dev dependency. So I'm going to say npm install -D and then nodemon. Okay, and as a lot of you guys know, nodemon it'll constantly refresh the server when we make a change, so we don't have to do it manually. And then once that's installed, we just want to add a couple scripts here. One is going to be our regular start script, which is just going to run Node, and it's going to run the app.js file. All right, and then we want a nodemon app.js, and we're going to call this dev, so that we can do npm run dev, and that will start up our server with nodemon. All right, so now we can close that up, and let's create a file called app.js. So this is obviously our entry point. We're going to go ahead and bring in some stuff here. We need to bring in Express, and we need to bring in a couple other things like Express-handlebars. Okay, let's call this EXPHBS for Express handlebars, and we also want to bring in our body parser. And we also want to bring in the path module, which we didn't install. That's actually a core Node.js module just to deal with file paths. Let's create our app variable and set that to Express. So we want to initialize our app, and let's say app.listen, which will run our server. And for a port, let's create a variable called port, and I'm going to set that to process.env.port. Or on our local machine, we're going to run it on 5000. All right, and we'll put that port right in here. And let's do a shortcut for an arrow function, and we'll just do console log, put in some backticks, and we'll say server started on port, and then we can insert a variable with this syntax. Okay, so that should run the server. Now we don't have any routes, so let's create our index route. So app.get, because we're catching a get request, to slash, which is just the index page, and then second parameter will be a function with request and response as a parameter. Okay, and all I'm going to do here is just res.send to the browser the text of, let's just say, index. Okay, so we should be able to run this. Let's do npm run dev, and let's go ahead and open it up. So we'll go to localhost port 5000, and there we go. So we know that that's working. So now I just want to start to implement Sequelize before we do anything, just to make sure we can actually connect to our database. So let's go ahead and do that. Now, ultimately we're going to have our database connection in a different file, but for now I'm just going to do it in here. So I'm going to create a let's create a variable called Sequelize, and actually we can just take a look at the docs right here. So setting up a connection, we just need to bring it in and then create a variable and set it to new Sequelize, pass in all of our stuff. So I'm just going to copy this line here, or you can use the connection URI. I'm gonna do this method here. So let's just paste that in. Okay, so we bring it in, create a variable. We need to put in our database name, which is going to be, what did I call it? CodeGig. The username is going to be Postgres. That's what I used, and my password for Postgres is just 1 through 6. I'm actually going to call this DB instead of Sequelize, though. And let's see, host is localhost. Now dialect, since I'm using Postgres, that's what I'm going to use. But if you're using one of these other ones, make sure that you choose the correct one. So let's do Postgres. Okay, it should automatically know the port and stuff like that. The connection pool, I'm going to leave those settings. Let's get rid of this. That's for SQLite only. And now we should be able to test the connection. So let's say test DB. And we should be able to do that by taking our DB and calling authenticate, which returns a promise. So we just want to do .then, and if it successfully connects, let's just say database connected. Okay, and then if something goes wrong, it'll run the catch with the error. And if there's an error, let's just whoops, I forgot the console log. Definitely want to do that. So we'll just console log the error. Actually, we'll just put in like error and then the error. All right, so let's save, and there we go. Down here you can see in the console we have database connected. It's also going to show us all the queries. Whenever we run a query, it should show us down here. But yeah, so we are connected to the database, which is good. So like I said, I don't want to keep this in here. This really clutters up our app.js file. So what I'm going to do is create a folder called config. And inside there, I'll create a file called database.js. And I want to move everything that we just did. So bringing in Sequelize, creating the database. I guess we'll leave the test in here, I guess, but let's grab the rest of this stuff. And let's go into database.js and we paste that in. Now instead of creating a variable here, we want to just export this. So let's say module dot exports equals, and then that. Okay, so that we can access it from other files, and then we're going to go into app.js and we need to bring that in because right now it has no idea what DB is right here. So let's say just say database, and we'll create a variable called DB, and we're going to set that to require, and we want to go into config/database. Let's save that. And there we go. So database connected. So it cleans it up a little bit. We don't have to have everything in our app.js. All right, now the next thing we want to do is create a model. Okay, when you have a resource, whether it's users or posts, whatever it may be, in our case it's gigs, you need to have a model for that resource. Just like Mongoose with MongoDB, if you guys have ever used that. So let's create a folder called models, and inside models we're going to create a file called gig.js, uppercase G. Our model should be uppercase by convention. And let's bring in Sequelize. So we'll say const Sequelize equals require Sequelize. Okay, and next thing we want to bring in is our database. So let's say const db equals require, and let's see, we're gonna go outside of the models folder, inside the config folder, and then into database. And to create a model, we're gonna create a variable called gig, and we're gonna set this to db.define, and we're gonna call this gig. And then the second parameter is going to be an object. Whoops, it's going to be an object of fields. Okay, very similar to how Mongoose works. So we're going to have a title, and it's going to have a type. Okay, the type is going to be Sequelize dot string. All right, let's actually copy this. We'll copy this down. Let's see, we're going to have 2, 3, 4, 5 of these. And they're actually all going to be strings, so we can leave that. But the next one is going to be technologies. This one is going to be description. This one is going to be budget. And this one is contact email. Okay, and that should do it. Now let's just export. So we'll say module.exports equals gig. Okay, so now that we have our model, let's see how do we want to do this. You know what, we're gonna have this index route right here. All it's going to do is load the home page, which is, you know, we're using handlebars for that, which we still need to set up. Then we're going to have a separate file for all the routes that have to do with gigs. So fetching them, you know, the post, or I'm sorry, the search, adding them, things like that. So let's create another folder in our root here called routes. Okay, and inside there we're going to have a file called gigs.js. Okay, so this is going to be all the routes for our gigs. Now we have to point to this file, so I'm going to go back to app.js, and down here at the bottom, right above the port, let's say gig routes. So we're going to create, I'm going to say app.use. And for anything that's /gigs, we want to require the gigs route. So it's going to be ./routes/gigs. Okay. So we'll save that, and then it's going to give us an error because we haven't set up the router in the gigs file. So let's go to routes/gigs.js, and let's bring in express, because we need to use the express router. Okay, so we're going to say require express, and let's say const router is going to equal express.router. And then let's just create a route for just /gigs. So let's say router dot get. Now, since we pointed to already pointed /gigs to this file, then all we need to put here is a slash, and that's actually going to pertain to /gigs. And let's do request response, and let's just do a res.send just to test it out, make sure this works, and we'll just say gigs like that. Oh, I forgot to export it. I always do that. So let's say module.exports equals router. Okay, so now everything looks good. Let's go to our browser and let's go to /gigs. Okay, so we know that that's working good. Now, what I want to do in this route is I want to be able to fetch all the gigs that are in the database, which right now we don't have any, but I still want to add the functionality for that, and then we'll start to work on adding the forms so that we can actually add gigs and stuff like that. You can go into pgadmin or phpMyAdmin, whatever, or the terminal, and you can add data that way, but I'm not going to bother doing that. So the way that this works is we need to bring in our database. So let's do that. Let's say const db equals require, and we want to bring in, let's see, where are we? We're in routes, so we want to go outside of routes into config and then database. And then instead of doing this res.send, I'm sorry, we need to bring in our model as well. So let's say const, I'm going to call it gig. We're going to set this to require and then point to the model. So outside of routes into models, and then we want gig. And instead of res.send, we'll get rid of that. Let's say gig dot, and then we can use any method that's available with Sequelize, such as find all. Okay, so we want to use find all. Now, what this does is it returns a promise. So I'm actually going to go on to the next line here. And it returns a promise, so we're going to use a dot then. Okay, so we'll do dot then, and we'll do dot catch in case there's some kind of error. And if there's an error, then let's just console.log the error. All right, so in the dot then, what it's going to do is it's going to give us our gigs, right? So we're going to say gigs, and we'll have an arrow, and then let's just do a console.log of the gigs. Actually, you know what I'll do is wrap this in curly braces. Because after the console log, I'm just going to res.send. We'll just send a status of 200, just so it's not hanging. All right, so let's try that and see what we get. So if we go to /gigs and reload, we get OK because we're just sending a 200 status. But let's go back into VS Code and take a look down here. So what we get is an empty array, and that's exactly what we expect because we don't have any data in there. But it shows us the query, so select ID, title, technologies, all of our fields. It's selecting from gigs as gig. So even though we don't have any data, everything looks okay, and it should be working. And if you, like I said, if you want to add data through pgadmin or phpMyAdmin, if you're using MySQL, you can do that. But I think that I'm going to stop the video here. Now that we have our database set up, we are connected to it, we're able to query it using our model that we created. So in the next video, we're going to start to implement our template engine, which is handlebars, so that we can have an interface to work with, and we want to be able to add gigs through a form. All right, so we'll get into that next.